I had some spare time that night, and having chugged a few coffees earlier in the day, I figured I'd use this energy to go out and make some money. I was delivering for DoorDash, cruising on the highway to my next delivery. It was super late, the roads were empty, and the night was very peaceful. Basically every delivery driver's dream. On my way there, though, my phone started buzzing. It was the customer calling me, but before I had a chance to answer it, they hung up. Since it only rang for a couple of seconds, I thought it must have been an accident. Just in case it wasn't, I redialed their number. It rang for a while, but they didn't answer. I shook my head and blew it off, not thinking about it for the rest of the drive. I got off the highway and drove into the neighborhood. It was a very regular street with average houses. When I arrived at the house my delivery was for, I parked right in the driveway and started walking up to their porch. As I was setting down the bag, I noticed the front door was cracked open. I didn't know if that was meant for me or not, so I lightly knocked on the door and called out that I was dropping off their food. As soon as I did, I heard a somewhat disturbing sound coming from down the hallway. It was a muffled thump that almost mimicked my knocking, like someone was banging on a door. A bit shaken, I pushed the front door open wider and called out again. I wasn't sure what to say, so I just repeated myself, saying that I was delivering their food. A few quiet moments passed, and then I heard a door open from the back of the house. A guy came around the corner, looking distressed and bothered, though I couldn't tell if it was because of me or something else. The guy walked down the hall and right up to the doorway where I was standing, not saying a word as he started to reach for the bag. But that's when I heard those thumps again from down the hallway. I looked past him in confusion. He turned to look as well, then quickly turned back to me, his face showing that he recognized I had heard it too. "Is everything okay?" I asked carefully. The sound echoed through the walls again. The man just kind of stared at me, as if he were trying to think of what to do next. Then he said, almost in a demanding tone, "Why don't you bring the food inside for me?" Nervously, I picked up the bag but quickly realized how terrible of an idea this was. I felt threatened, like I had no choice but to follow him. At the same time, I had a gut feeling that if I did, I wouldn't make it out of there. My hesitation must have been obvious because his face showed he was growing more agitated, maybe even angry. Suddenly, he reached out and grabbed the food right from my hands, then slammed the door in my face. Stunned, I stood there for a moment, listening as his footsteps moved down the hallway. The thumping stopped. I couldn't do anything else at that point, so I hurried off the porch and got into my car. I ended my DoorDash shift after that delivery and decided to report the unsettling scenario to the police. What convinced me to report it was the man's attempt to get me to go inside his house. If not for that, I might not have felt there was enough evidence to justify involving them. Unfortunately, the police informed me hours later that the man denied anyone else was there and refused their request to search his home. At that point, there was nothing more they could do. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that something truly horrible was going on in that house. The man's behavior, the strange noises, and his attempt to lure me inside. It all felt like a close call. I believe he might have been ready to do something terrible to me, but I'll likely never know for sure. That night, though, changed how I view these late-night deliveries forever. I work as a delivery driver. It might not be the dream job, but it's flexible and keeps the lights on. Most of the time, it's straightforward. Pick up food, drop it off. Nothing too exciting, nothing too weird. Sure, occasionally there's a quirky customer or an unusual request, but it's usually nothing to write home about. At least that's what I thought until one customer turned my life upside down. It was during the dinner rush, around 7:30 p.m., when I got a delivery request from a nice Italian restaurant across town. The customer had ordered pasta, salad, and tiramisu, a step above the usual runs of burgers and pizza. The address was in a quiet residential neighborhood, the kind with manicured lawns and pristine cars parked in the driveways. When I pulled up to the house, it was already dark. The porch light was on, casting a warm, inviting glow. I grabbed the delivery bag and walked up to the door. After knocking, the door swung open almost immediately. A man, maybe in his mid-30s, stood there, smiling just a little too widely. "Hey there," he greeted. "Thanks for bringing this over so quickly. You must be swamped tonight." "Yeah, it's been busy," I replied, handing him the bag. He lingered in the doorway, holding the bag but not stepping back inside. His smile didn't waver. He said, "You've got a great voice. Have you ever done any voice work? Like radio or something?" It was an odd compliment, but I laughed it off. "Nope, just delivering food." "Well, you should think about it. Anyway, thanks again. Have a good night." I thanked him, turned, and walked back to my car. The interaction felt off, but I brushed it aside. People could be weird sometimes. I finished my shift and didn't think about it again until the next day. The following afternoon, I got a notification from a dating app I'd almost forgotten about. Someone had sent me a message. What caught my attention wasn't the message itself, but the profile picture. It was him, the overly friendly customer from the night before. His message was simple. "Hey, didn't we meet last night?" My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't given him my name or any personal information. How had he found me? My profile didn't even have a clear picture of my face, just an old hiking photo where I was wearing sunglasses. I decided not to respond. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe he wasn't sure it was me. But the messages kept coming. "You seem cool. Let's hang out sometime. Don't ignore me. I know you saw this. You're really going to pretend we didn't meet?" It was unsettling, but I figured if I didn't engage, he'd move on. Unfortunately, he didn't. A week later, I noticed a new follow request on Instagram. My account was private, but there it was, his profile, complete with a message. "You really need to work on being more approachable." That was enough for me. I blocked him on the dating app and Instagram, hoping that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. 2 days later, I got a direct message on Facebook. "Why are you ignoring me? I thought we had a connection." Fear crept in. How was he finding me on different platforms? I blocked him again, but every time I closed a door, he found another way in. One night, while working another shift, I noticed a car following me. First, I thought it was a coincidence, but every turn I made, the car stayed with me. I started taking random turns, trying to shake them. It didn't work. My stomach sank when I recognized the car. It was the same make and model as the one in his dating profile pictures. Panic set in. I pulled into a busy gas station and stayed in the car, pretending to scroll through my phone. The car idled on the street for a few minutes before driving off. I told myself it couldn't be him, but the eerie sensation wouldn't let up. The next morning, I told my brother everything. He's the kind of guy who doesn't take nonsense from anyone, and I thought having him ride along with me might make me feel safer. When I explained the delivery, the messages, the stalking, and the car, his face darkened. "That's not normal," he said. "You're not doing another delivery alone." Relieved but apprehensive, I agreed. That night, he climbed into the passenger seat of my car as we headed out. His presence made me feel a little safer. As we drove, we passed the gas station where I'd seen the car the night before. My stomach sank. It was parked there again. "That's him, isn't it?" my brother asked, unbuckling his seatbelt. He was already reaching for the door handle. "I'm going to have a word with this guy." "No!" I grabbed his arm. "Don't. It's not worth it. You're just going to let this creep get away with following you? What if he's planning something worse?" "Please," I said. "We'll handle it, but not like this. Let's go to the police station." My brother hesitated, his hand still on the door handle. Finally, he relented with a frustrated sigh. "Fine, but if I see him again, we're not running." At the police station, I explained everything to the officer on duty. My brother backed me up, adding his own observations. The officer listened carefully, taking notes. "This is serious," he said. "You've done the right thing by coming here. We'll look into it immediately." Filing the report felt both empowering and unsettling. The officer assured us they'd investigate and told me to call if anything else happened. That night, my brother insisted on staying over. Despite his company, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios. The next day, I took steps to protect myself. I changed my social media handles, tightened my privacy settings, and started sharing my location with my brother whenever I worked late shifts. I also began varying my routes home and avoided deliveries near his neighborhood. For weeks, I was on edge, jumping at every notification and scanning my mirrors constantly. Slowly, the messages stopped. He seemed to vanish. I don't know if the police scared him off or if he found someone else to target. Looking back, it feels like something out of a bad movie. But the fear was real, and it taught me how vulnerable we can be, especially in jobs that put us in contact with strangers. Working as a delivery driver doesn't require much interaction beyond the basics, which is exactly how I like it. I'm a guy who appreciates efficiency, and most nights, I manage to stick to my routine without any drama. But that night, something changed. I had been on the road for a few hours, hitting all the usual spots. Pizza joints, burger places, Chinese takeout. The orders came in steady but manageable, and I was making good time. It was a little after 8 p.m. when the app pinged me for a delivery not far from my current location. The customer had ordered a large pizza and a 6-pack of soda, standard stuff. The address was in a decent neighborhood, one of those older suburban areas where the houses all have big front yards and long driveways. It wasn't too far from the pizza place, so I accepted the order and headed over. When I pulled up, it looked normal enough, the kind of place where you wouldn't expect anything out of the ordinary. I grabbed the insulated bag from the passenger seat, checked the name on the order, Michael, and headed to the front door. I rang the bell and waited. A few seconds later, the door creaked open just enough for me to see a man's face peeking out. He looked to be in his mid-40s, with short cropped hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His smile was wide, maybe a little too wide, but I didn't think much of it at the time. "Hey there, you're right on time," he said, opening the door a bit more. "Here's your order," I said, handing over the bag. He took it with one hand, still holding the door with the other. "Thanks, man. Oh, hang on, I've got a tip for you. Just step inside for a second while I grab it." I paused. "No worries, you just hand it to me here," I replied, keeping my tone polite but firm. Delivery policies are pretty clear about that, and besides, something about the way he said it made me feel uncomfortable. He leaned against the doorframe, his smile now feeling more forced than friendly. "Seriously, it's just right there. Don't be weird about it." I shook my head, taking a small step back. "Company policy. Thanks for understanding." For a moment, he just stared at me, his eyes narrowing slightly. Then, without a word, he pushed the door open wider and gestured inside. The hallway beyond was dimly lit, the kind of lighting that made it hard to see where the walls ended and the shadows began. "Look," he said, his tone losing its friendliness. "I'm trying to give you a tip here. Do you want it or not?" "I appreciate it, but I can't come in," I said, backing up another step. That's when he grabbed my arm. It wasn't a hard grip, but it was enough to send a jolt of alarm through me. "Just step inside," he said, his voice low and insistent. I yanked my arm free, stumbling back onto the porch. "No!" My voice was louder than I intended, but I didn't care. Adrenaline was kicking in, and all I wanted was to get out of there. The man stepped out onto the porch, his expression shifting to something colder. "I'm just trying to be nice," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "No need to be rude." I didn't bother responding. I turned and walked quickly back to my car. The man stayed on the porch, watching me with that same unnerving smile. As I got into the car, he raised his hand in a mock salute. "Have a good night," he called, his voice too cheerful to be genuine. I started the car and backed out of the driveway as fast as I could without drawing more attention. Once I was a safe distance away, I pulled over to the side of the road and took a moment to collect myself. My heart was racing. I grabbed my phone and reported the incident to the delivery app, detailing everything that had happened. They responded quickly, thanking me for the report and assuring me they'd flagged the customer's account. It was a small comfort, but the unease didn't completely disappear. The next day, I couldn't get the encounter out of my head. He'd seemed so normal at first, so friendly. But the way he'd grabbed my arm and tried to force me inside, it wasn't just inappropriate, it was calculated. Later that week, I brought up the incident with a close friend of mine who happens to be a police officer. I expected him to laugh it off or tell me I was overthinking it, but his expression turned serious as I described what had happened. "That's not just creepy. It's dangerous," he said. "You should report it. If this guy's done something like this before, there might already be a record." I felt a little ridiculous about filing a police report over what some might see as just a weird encounter. But my friend insisted. If he's bold enough to try pulling you inside his house, he'll try it again with someone else. And next time, it could be worse. The next day, I went down to the local police station and told them everything. The officer taking my statement nodded as I explained the situation. When I mentioned the man's behavior, his insistence, the physical grab, and his unsettling smile, they asked if I could provide the address and a description of him. "You're not the first to complain about this guy," the officer said. "We've had 2 other reports of harassment and inappropriate behavior tied to that address. We're building a case, but unfortunately, we haven't been able to charge him yet." Hearing that made my stomach turn. The idea that this man had a history of luring people, that others had already fallen into similar situations, was deeply unsettling. I asked if there was anything more I could do to help. "We're actively building a case against him," the officer said. "Your statement is crucial. There's a chance we'll need you to testify if it goes to court." The thought of facing that man again, even in a courtroom, sent a wave of unease through me, but I knew it was the right thing to do. If my experience could help stop him from putting someone else in danger, I was willing to step up. Before I left, the officer reassured me, "You did the right thing by coming forward. We'll keep you updated as the case progresses, and we're flagging his address in our system." I walked out of the station feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. The encounter wasn't just a creepy, isolated incident. It was part of a pattern, and I might have been one of many who narrowly escaped something worse. It wasn't a comforting thought, but at least now there was a chance to put an end to it. I'm relieved I walked away from that house unharmed, but the knowledge that this man was still out there, with other complaints against him, continues to haunt my memory. Delivering food might seem routine, but experiences like this remind me that danger can lurk behind any door.